This year I traveled to 6 countries, spent more than 1 million miles in points, and extracted about $20,000 in value from all those miles and points. While those numbers might sound very impressive, traveling isn't necessarily free because there are always phantom costs associated with your travel. So the million points and miles question is, would I do it again? And the answer is absolutely yes. Traveling allows you to explore different cultures, different cuisines, meet family and friends. So for me, the phantom costs are absolutely worth it. So in this video, let's get into all the places that I traveled to, the airlines I flew, the hotels I stayed at, and all the costs associated with it. Our first trip of the year was to Cancun in Mexico. And this was the leisure trip before we moved out to the West Coast from New York City. We went to Cancun for a total of 5 days. So let's break down the airlines, the hotels, and all the costs associated with our stay here. On our way over, we flew Delta. On the way back, we flew JetBlue. For the flight from JFK to Cancun, we spent about 28,900 miles and about $46 in taxes and fees. Now, while I don't have the retail prices from earlier this year, I checked the prices for around the same time next year, and the tickets are for $150 per person. So we spent a total of 57,800 miles and about $92 in taxes and fees to get about $300 in value. That's not a great redemption at about 0.35 cents per point. On the way back from Cancun to JFK, we took a JetBlue flight which cost us a total of $890, but we paid this out of pocket because we had some travel credits to use on JetBlue. Now this is the starting point of the phantom costs that start to add up. Now while most of the trip was covered with points and miles, because we could not find a good offer for the flight back, we just paid it out of pocket. But there's more. We stayed at 2 resorts during our trip to Cancun. The first was the Conrad in Tulum and the second was the Waldorf Astoria in Cancun. And if you want to check out a review of these hotels, I'll link the videos up there. So initially after we landed, we went to the Conrad in Tulum and stayed 2 nights here. I paid for one of the nights with a free night certificate and paid for the other night with 100,000 points from my Hilton Honors account. If you looked at the retail price for the Conrad Tulum around the same time, it's about $1,550. And that translates to a cent per point valuation of 0.77. Then we took a taxi and moved to the Waldorf Astoria in Cancun, and here we stayed for 3 nights. 2 of those nights were paid for by the free night award certificate, and one of the nights we paid 105,000 points. If you look at the retail price for the hotel room, it's about $34.50 for 3 nights. And so the cent per point valuation here is a little higher of 1.1. And since we used 2 free award nights, and they are equivalent to standard availability of 105,000 points, I've assumed that the total number of points used for our stay here was 315,000 points. So these are Hilton Honors points, and they're generally valued at about 0.6 to 0.7, but I was definitely able to extract more than that. And during both the stays, we were upgraded to the next tier of rooms. But let's talk about the phantom costs a little bit. During our stay at the Waldorf Astoria in Cancun, we did use their spa services, which was not cheap. And while you would think that because it's Mexico, the food's going to be cheaper from a US dollar standpoint, most of the prices at these resorts are similar to prices in the US. So if you account for the food, the spa services, as well as the flights that we paid for with JetBlue, suddenly the costs start adding up. Now, while we don't remember what we exactly spent on food, I think the overall cash out of pocket was around $3,000. That brings us to our second trip, which was to Germany and Netherlands in the month of March. This was the trip I was doing with 3 other friends of mine from college, and our plan was to fly into Hamburg, spend some time there meeting our friend who lives there, then travel to Amsterdam for a couple of days, come back, spend a day in Berlin, and then fly back to our respective destinations. And by this time, my girlfriend had already moved out to the West Coast, but I was still in New York. And for my flights from here to Germany and back, I was able to snag some really good business class seats both ways. So let's talk about them. Since I couldn't find good award availability from here to Hamburg directly, I looked at award availability from here to Frankfurt. And when reviewing award availability, I was able to find Delta One business class seats on the Virgin Atlantic website for 50,000 points and $5.60 in taxes and fees. And the retail price for this Delta One ticket is about $3,200. For this particular booking, I was able to transfer over Amex points to Virgin Atlantic and make the booking. And then from Frankfurt to Hamburg, I was able to buy a ticket with Lufthansa, which was about $120. On the way back from Hamburg to New York, I was able to find award availability using Flying Blue this time on business class, and the flight connected via Amsterdam. This flight cost me 55,000 points and about $230 in taxes and fees. And if you look at the retail price of this ticket, it's about $2,230. As far as the hotel stays here were concerned, we split the bookings between the 4 of us, and I used Hyatt points to pay for the stay in the Lindner Hotel in Hamburg, and each of those nights cost us 8,000 points. And if you look at the retail price of those tickets, it's about $208 every single night. So if you did the cent per point valuation, it turns out to about 2.6. And on this trip, the phantom cost included the flight from Frankfurt to Hamburg when I was flying in, some of the train tickets we took to go from Hamburg to Berlin, and also a car rental that we took from Hamburg to Amsterdam. And it goes without saying that we also had to spend on food and chocolates. Then we come to the third trip of the year, which was to Thailand with my parents to celebrate their 40th anniversary. On the way over there, I paid out of pocket for Korean Air economy flights And I booked it through Delta because I was trying to get to Platinum Medallion with Delta. And while in Thailand, we stayed at 4 hotels. The Hyatt Regency in Bangkok, the Naka Island Luxury Collection Hotel by Marriott. The third hotel was the Pimalai Resort and Spa in Krabi, which was part of the small luxury hotel collection and was a part of Hyatt back then. Ever since, they've moved over to Hilton, but the hotel can still be found on Hyatt as part of the Mr. and Mrs. Smith collection. And last but not the least was the Waldorf Astoria in Bangkok. For the Hyatt Regency in Bangkok, we stayed 2 nights and we paid 9,000 points per night. So that's a total of 36,000 points, and the retail price for these nights was about $208. That computes to a total of about $832. And if you talk about the Marriott property in Naka Island, here we booked a villa but got upgraded to a larger villa which had a plunge pool right in front of it, and we booked this for 146,000 points. And the retail price for the room was about $613 a night, so a little over $1,200 for 2 nights. So the cent per point calculation yields a value of about 0.8. Now a quick pointer about the Naka Island resort. Our experience here was okay. If I had to pay $613 a night out of pocket, I probably wouldn't do it again. The star of the show was definitely the Pimalai Resort and Spa in Krabi. This was an incredible hotel. Everything from the greenery around, this being a part of the national forest, the beach being right in front of the properties, and just how beautiful the rooms were set up. This would be the one resort across our stay which I would highly recommend to everyone. This is still a category 6 hotel with Hyatt, and we spent about 30,000 points per night per room for 2 nights. That was a total of 120,000 points across 2 rooms. And while we were checking in, we did get upgraded to the next tier of room. So the retail price of the room was about $543 a night. And that brought the total retail price to $2,172. And if you did the cent per point calculation, this turns out to about 1.8. And last but not the least was the Waldorf Astoria in Bangkok. Here we paid out of pocket, but I booked it through the Fine Hotels and Resorts. So I was able to use the $200 credit, but everything else was out of pocket. And again, as you can see, the internal flights, a lot of the sightseeing, the food, and then the stay at Waldorf Astoria as well as the flight with Korean Air, all of that was out of pocket. The next trip of the year was a trip to Iceland for my girlfriend's birthday. And this was in the month of June. For the flights here, we were able to get good availability with Delta for 73,000 points round trip. If you look at the retail price of this ticket, it's about $1,800 per person. So the cent per point value is about 2.4, which is significantly higher compared to what you generally get for Delta, which is less than 2 cents per point. We booked 3 hotels for a stay in Iceland, but our initial flight was cancelled and our flight the next day was heavily delayed. So we ended up reaching Iceland a day after we were supposed to get there. The first hotel we stayed at was Hotel Husafell, and the highlight of the hotel was that it had hot natural springs, and you can access this hot natural spring by taking a van up the mountain. And since this was an independent hotel, we paid out of pocket. The second hotel was the 360 Hotel and Thermal Bath, and for this too, we paid out of pocket. And the last hotel we stayed at was the Edition, which was a part of the Marriott properties. This was an incredible hotel, modern architecture, and this was right bang in the middle of the city, and so you could access pretty much everything from the hotel. We spent about 73,000 points using my girlfriend's credit card, and if you looked at the retail price of the property, it's about $630, which yields a cent per point value of 0.86. But like with all of our other trips, let's talk about the phantom costs. This involved mainly food, because food in Iceland is really expensive. The food overall was excellent, but it is definitely expensive. So you pay a premium for what you get. We also had to take a car rental, which definitely increased the cost of the trip. There were 2 trips during the year which was within the US to New York. The first one was in August and the second one was in November. Let's talk about the August one first. For our flights, we booked Delta Comfort Plus for about $536, but I was able to use the companion pass on my Delta Amex Reserve card. It was only $30 in taxes and fees. And as for our stay, we stayed at our place in New York. Then we did another trip in November where we paid $521 out of pocket for Delta main cabin. And during this trip, we mainly stayed upstate in our Airbnb, but there were 2 days we stayed at the Thompson Hotel near Central Park. Each of the nights at the hotel was about 28,000 points. And if you look at the retail price for 2 nights at the property, it's about $1,690. And so the cent per point value is about 3. There was a third trip in the US that I forgot to talk about, which was a trip to Scottsdale in Arizona. And we stayed at the Andaz in Scottsdale. And if you want to check out a review of the hotel, I'll link it up there. And since this was a Hyatt property, we booked this using points. For each of the nights, we spent 21,000 points. And if you look at the retail price for those 2 nights, it's about $1,350. So the cent per point value was a little over 3. And last but not the least was my flight to India in September. My flight from here to India and back was made with KLM in premium economy for about $2,400. I paid for all the internal flights within India as well, but I did spend a couple of nights at the Taj Mahal Hotel in Delhi. But this was booked by my friend using his points and miles in India. He did mention to me that he has a Taj Epicure membership that gives him 1 free night, and then he also has an HDFC Business Black credit card that gives him a milestone benefit of 5,000 vouchers for every $3,000 in spend. So over the course of having that card, he had accumulated about 15,000 vouchers, which is how he paid for the second night. And that's how I traveled to 6 countries, spent over 1 million points and miles, extracted more than $20,000 worth of value from those points and miles, and had a ton of experiences. But I do not want to undermine the importance of these phantom costs that come with these trips that we rarely talk about. While all of the travel I did during the year was absolutely worth it to me, you will need to figure out what the balance of that equation is for you. And always account for the phantom costs. And I have a few upcoming trips that I'm going to make a video about, so stay tuned.